The setting is a small urban bookstore with evidence that they are going out of business. There is a table with books on it, an overstuffed chair, and a small table for checkout. Time is the present. The phone is ringing. Mrs. Hughes is sleeping in the overstuffed chair. Abby, furious, dressed like a clown with a false red nose, brightly colored wig and shoes and suspenders, and carrying a going out of business spinning sign, enters and yells to the street.
Hey, watch your mouth. Does your mother know you speak to clowns that way?
Abby throws her sign on the floor in disgust.
Creep.
Mrs. Hughes is startled from sleep and sits up.
Not you, Mrs. Hughes.
Abby answers the phone.
Bertha's books. This is Abby. Yes, we have that one. But hurry, we close in 15 minutes.
What do they want?
50 Shades of Grey.
Call me old-fashioned, but I think if a book is about sex, it should be clear from the title.
Oh, you mean like The Joy of Sex?
Or Moby Dick.
But Moby Dick is about a whale.
It is?
A gigantic white whale and a guy who's obsessed with catching it.
Are you sure?
Call me Ishmael.
Why? I like Abby.
No, that's the first line, Mrs. Hughes, of Moby Dick.
But you said it was about a whale.
It is. There are harpoons and everything.
Oh.
What did you think it was about?
Never mind. They should change the title.
I'll text Mr. Melville.
You wouldn't happen to have it, would you?
Moby Dick?
No, the other one.
The Joy of...
I just want to see if there's anything I missed.
I think there might be an ancient copy over there on the table.
While Mrs. Hughes crosses back to the table, finds The Joy of Sex, sits in the overstuffed chair, and starts to leaf through the book.
How's it feel to be a clown?
Underappreciated.
I'm sure folks in the neighborhood thought you were charming.
Folks in this neighborhood? The only folks who live in this neighborhood are creeps and perverts.
Creeps and perverts who like to read, I hope.
Don't count on it.
No one came in?
No one. Mrs. Hughes. And would you please tell her that Moby Dick is about a whale?
She knows that.
She doesn't act like it.
She's messing with you. Mrs. Hughes, quit messing with Abby.
Any word on the bookstore?
Yeah, apparently some clown, no offense meant,
None taken.
threw a wad of cash down and bought the whole building.
He thinks we're about to get yuppified.
Condos or coffee shop, what's your bet?
20 on condos.
Mrs. Hughes, what have you got there? Who recommended that?
Abby?
Abby?
Tell me, Bertha, have you ever done this? Really? I was never that flexible.
It's comforting to know that my years at City Ballet weren't a total waste.
Abby, how about you?
Mrs. Hughes, no.
Stop tormenting Abby, Mrs. Hughes.
I am not tormenting poor Abby. It's a simple question.
The truth is, Mrs.
Matthew,
Hughes,
whoops, sorry.
I'm still in the table of contents.
Matthew enters, crosses to the table stacked with books, picks up a book, and starts reading. Abby,
Isn't-
Bertha, and Mrs. Hughes stare.
But isn't that...
Matthew Timmons.
Who?
Shh.
Since when do you know his name?
Since I accidentally glanced at his American Express card.
Well, go on.
No way, you go on.
It's not my job.
Bertha,
Mrs. Hughes is right, Abby. It is your job.
for another 10 minutes.
Get going then.
Mrs. Hughes pushes Abby toward Matthew. Abby makes an angry face toward Mrs. Hughes and crosses to Matthew, who is looking at the books on the table. They both stand there quietly. Then Matthew looks up at Abby.
I like what you've done with your hair.
Abby.
Abby removes her wig and throws it at Mrs. Hughes.
Why are you a clown?
I was spinning a going out of business sign earlier to try to drum up customers.
Who's the marketing genius who came up with that?
Me.
Matthew Timmons.
While Abby shakes his hand and glances over to see Bertha and Mrs. Hughes staring, she gives a look that says, "Mind your own business," and they conspicuously busy themselves.
Abby.
I need a book to impress a woman.
Your wife.
Do I look like I have a wife?
Mystery, adventure, crime, science fiction, romance.
Romance. She loves romance.
Do you love her?
Of course.
Do you know much about literature?
One semester, C+.
Does she know much?
Gobs, unfortunately.
Okay, so we're looking for a romance that will make it look like you know more about literature than you actually do to impress a woman you love. Pride and Prejudice
Pride and Prejudice?
by Jane Austen. Did you know she was my age when she wrote it?
What's that got to do with anything?
Nothing. I just thought it was.
It won't work.
It will too work.
She's already read it.
Of course, she's already read it.
Why would I give her a book she's already read?
Because you're sending a message
I'm sending a message?
that you love her.
Oh. Right. Good.
Now the only question is, do we have any copies left? It's not here. Let me go check in the back.
Abby exits. Mrs. Hughes crosses to Matthew.
Excuse me, young man. I overheard you talking to Abby. You're looking for a book about romance, right?
Uh-huh.
Mrs. Hughes hands Matthew The Joy of Sex.
I dog-eared the pages that should be the most useful.
Matthew is speechless. Mrs. Hughes crosses to the checkout table as Abby enters, holding Pride and Prejudice up in the air.
The last copy.
Abby grabs The Joy of Sex from Matthew.
Where'd you get this?
That woman?
Mrs. Hughes. Mrs. Hughes, thank you, but I'm already waiting on this customer.
I was just trying to be of assistance.
I don't need your assistance.
So you say.
Abby crosses to Matthew and holds up Pride and Prejudice.
I think she'll be more impressed with this one.
Yeah, the other one might be a little bit too...
Aspirational. Anything else?
Gift box?
I think I used the last one this morning. If we have any left, they'd be in the back too. Let me go see.
Abby exits. Charlie enters. Homeless, bedraggled, frightened, and delusional. Mrs. Hughes sees him first.
Bertha.
Bertha sees Charlie.
Oh, no.
Bertha crosses to Charlie and puts both her hands against his chest and tries to push him out of the store without success. Charlie pushes Bertha aside and moves farther into the store. Mrs. Hughes takes up the defense and tries to push Charlie out of the store in an awkward and unintentionally comical way.
Shoo, you're not wanted here. Shoo. Go away. Shoo.
Abby returns with the book, but without a box. Everyone freezes. Pause. Abby speaks to Charlie slowly and calmly. Charlie is agitated.
You're not supposed to be here, Charlie.
Hello, Abigail.
The judge said no closer than 100 yards, remember?
Are you going out of business?
Yes, but you still can't be closer than 100 yards.
Is it because of the Russians?
No, Charlie, it's not the Russians.
The Russians, see, they put a chip in my head, and so they see everything that I see.
No one put a chip in your head, Charlie.
And I saw the going out of business sign, and the Russians must have seen it too. You need to escape before they come to get you.
No one's coming to get me.
Do you want me to call the president? He always takes my calls.
No, that won't be necessary.
You can't live on on the street. Go live with Janine.
Janine's dead, Charlie.
Okay, that's it.
Don't make trouble, Charlie, please.
Get out of my store.
Come on now,
You-
Charlie.
You have to
You're
get out of here.
happy.
The
Don't be
Russians are coming.
trouble.
Abigail, do
Now,
you hear me?
out,
you hear me?
out.
While Abby and Bertha breathe a sigh of relief, Abby notices that Mrs. Hughes can't get her breath, and Abby quickly crosses to her.
Mrs. Hughes, are you okay?
What's wrong?
Mrs. Hughes is out of breath.
I'm fine.
You are not fine.
Lucille, you shouldn't get so worked up.
Making a fuss.
Here, sit down.
Go wait on your customer.
Go on. We'll be all right.
Abby reluctantly crosses back to Matthew. While Abby is waiting on Matthew, Bertha lovingly places a blanket over Mrs. Hughes.
Welcome to the circus that masquerades as my life.
What's the deal with the crazy guy?
How much time do you have? He's paranoid, he's delusional, he hears voices, he
Is he dangerous?
depends on the voices.
Would he hurt you?
Maybe. He has in the past. But he'd have to catch me first, and I'm surprisingly elusive.
Get a restraining order.
I got a restraining order, and you just saw how much good it did.
Abby hands the book back to Matthew.
Sorry, no box. Try CVS. It's 2 blocks that way.
What do I owe you?
Nothing.
Nothing?
It'll be one less book for me to crate up.
Thanks. Say, do you want me to stick around in case he...
No,
Really, it wouldn't be any bother.
no, Charlie's my problem.
Matthew nods, then starts to leave. Abby calls after him.
Hope she likes it.
Matthew is not certain what Abby is talking about. He stops and turns. Abby points.
The book. I hope she likes it.
Oh, yeah, me too.
Matthew exits. Abby crosses to Bertha and points to Mrs. Hughes.
How's Mrs. Hughes?
Sleep.
Just before closing, right on time.
She's punctual. You got to give her that.
Where's she gonna take her naps when the bookstore closes?
The Russians are back.
Why is it always the Russians? Why couldn't just once it be the Canadians?
Can you see any way the Russian thing doesn't blow up in your face this time?
It.
Want to guess whether Charlie's off his meds?
It's a lock. Charlie can't even remember he found Janine dead on the bathroom floor with a needle in her arm.
Matthew seemed nice.
Matthew has a girlfriend.
An inconvenience which didn't prevent you from comping him a book.
That's because I'm a total dork.
Stop it.
You should have kicked me out back when you found me.
Oh, I would have, but Mrs. Hughes found you first.
Well, Mrs. Hughes should have kicked me out.
You were so grubby.
That bed was a godsend, though.
It had been her daughter's back before the... Did she ever mention
Once.
Mrs. Hughes couldn't abide you sleeping on the street?
Harlan enters and looks at the books on the table. Bertha points at Harlan.
One last customer.
Abby crosses to Harlan. He puts his hand out. They shake hands. Harlan is arrogant, which annoys Abby. I'm Harlan Porter. You're expecting me?
I am.
I'm from Fenner, Smith, Perkins, and O'Donoghue.
From where now?
Fenner, Smith, Perkins, and O'Donoghue, the law firm.
And I'm expecting you why?
The building.
Oh, you want Bertha then. Bertha! This is Harlan Porter. He's from Fenner, Smith, Perkins, and
O'Donoghue.
O'Donoghue. He's a lawyer.
Not exactly.
He's not exactly a lawyer.
I'm here to drop off the paperwork.
Excellent. Oh, what paperwork?
While Harlan pulls a folder of papers from his briefcase, and a pen out of his pocket and puts a form in front of Bertha. From the purchase of the building, all I need is one signature indicating that you've received the paperwork, and I'll be on my way. Harlan looks at the form and reads slowly. Mrs. Hughes.
Mrs. Hughes?
Mrs. Hughes bought this building.
I'm not Mrs. Hughes.
I was supposed to meet Mrs. Hughes here. Would you happen to know where she lives?
Most of the time asleep in that chair.
That's Mrs. Hughes.
Yes.
Harlan takes the form back and crosses to Mrs. Hughes. While he pokes her gently and she doesn't move, and he pokes her more firmly and she doesn't move. Abby and Bertha process the news.
What the?
I know. Where could Mrs. Hughes find that kind of money?
Excuse me.
Maybe her Powerball hit?
Can't. We always split 50-50.
Excuse me.
Yes?
Mrs. Hughes is
A very sound sleeper, I know. Mrs. Hughes. Mrs. Hughes. Hang on, I'll go wake her.
Abby crosses and shakes Mrs. Hughes. No response. Pause. Abby feels for a pulse.
Bertha, could you come here, please?
Bertha crosses to Mrs. Hughes. During the next sequence, Bertha and Abby act calmly and reverently while ignoring Harlan, who comes unglued.
Feel.
Abby puts Bertha's hand on Mrs. Hughes' neck. Pause.
Nothing.
What should we do?
How about mouth to mouth?
There are instructions in her purse.
She always keeps her purse.
Abby reaches under the chair and pulls out Mrs. Hughes's purse. Abby takes out the instructions and reads silently. I can't do mouth to mouth myself, obviously, for professional reasons.
She wants us to wait.
Then we wait.
What do you mean, wait? Abby and Bertha stand quietly while Harlan gets more and more uneasy.
At least she's in her favorite chair.
You're just going to stand there?
Yes.
You women are crazy. Here, if she wakes up, give her this.
But she's not gonna.
I don't care. I can't be any part of this. Harlan throws up his arms and exits. Abby is staring off into space. Bertha looks at Abby with concern. Finally,
Pulvis et umbra sumus.
You really should have come with subtitles.
We are but dust and shadow.
Cicero,
Horace.
how is it possible at the ripe old age of 20 that you know more of the classics than anyone I've ever met?
How is it possible that you knew this was in Mrs. Hughes' purse?
She showed me.
She knew she was dying?
Yes.
And neither of you thought to tell me?
It wasn't my call. It was her life.
It's my life too.
I'm sorry, Abby, but Mrs. Hughes didn't want her final days with you to be sad.
So what do we do now?
We wait.
For how long?
I don't know. I've never done this before.
Do you mind if I stay here with Mrs. Hughes?
She'd love that. I'll take a quick glance at Harlan's paperwork to see if there's anything urgent that needs attending to.
Bertha exits. Abby crosses to Mrs. Hughes. She stares forward, lost in her grief. Pause. Matthew enters enthusiastically and points.
Abby, did you say CVS was that way? Abby? Abby? Is CVS that way?
No.
Abby points in the opposite direction.
What's wrong?
It's Mrs. Hughes.
Matthew quickly crosses to Mrs. Hughes. He puts his book under Mrs. Hughes's chair. Matthew knowledgeably checks Mrs. Hughes for a pulse and breathing.
Do you have a flashlight?
Abby grabs a large flashlight from the checkout table and hands it to Matthew, who knowledgeably checks Mrs. Hughes's pupil response.
Did you call 911?
No.
Why not?
Abby hands Matthew Mrs. Hughes's instructions. He reads them.
Well, it looked like she got her wish.
Matthew hands back the instructions.
Who is she?
She's Mrs. Hughes. She gave me my bed
Where do you sleep?
in the back.
Can you sleep in the back like that?
I can sleep anywhere.
No, I mean legally. This space is surely zoned commercial.
Spend a few nights sleeping in a box on the street, Matthew, and you'll find you kind of lose your appreciation for the finer points of urban zoning.
Harlan re-enters, out of breath like he's been running.
Oh no, it's Harlan.
Who?
Hello, Harlan.
How is she?
Well, right this minute, she's planning her lingerie for a romantic rendezvous in Paris. He's not exactly a lawyer.
I should go. CVS that way?
That way.
I made a mistake.
Duh, you called us crazy. People skills, Harlan. People skills.
I need the paperwork.
And I need a diamond tiara. Looks like we're both out of luck.
You don't understand. The only person allowed to see that paperwork was Mrs. Lucille Hughes, and now she's... Stop! Bertha enters reading the paperwork. Stop! Bertha, surprised, stops. You can't read those. Bertha looks through the stack of documents and picks the one she hasn't read. Abby crosses to her.
I haven't read this one.
Bertha holds the unread document out for Harlan. Abby grabs it.
Last will and testament.
Give that to me!
Too slow.
Abby moves away from Harlan and reads. Look, you two, I am not fooling around.
The fool doth think he is wise.
That's not yours.
And it's not yours either, Harlan. It belongs to Mrs. Hughes, so chill. I've never seen an actual will before.
Look, those have to go back to our office.
She names you as the sole beneficiary.
Bertha looks very surprised, points to herself and mouths, me? Back to our office. Otherwise, I get fired.
Well, we wouldn't want that to happen.
Bertha and Abby hand the paperwork back to Harlan. He puts it in his briefcase.
Enough people are losing their jobs today.
Starts to exit, then stops and looks at Abby. Imagine selling everything you own just so you could buy this stupid rundown building. There's your fool. Matthew enters.
Honest to God, Abby, I'm a bad penny.
Matthew collides with Harlan, who is leaving. Watch it. Harlan exits.
I think we've probably waited long enough. I'm going to make the calls.
Well, bad penny, what brings you back?
I lost the book.
Already?
Someone probably swiped it.
I don't know, Matthew. 19th century English literature isn't the biggest prize for thieves around here. They're more into Vespas.
What are you doing tonight?
Pondering my wretched fate.
Come with me to Cafe Europa instead.
Won't your girlfriend object?
My girlfriend?
You know, you got her the book.
Oh, no, she's quite open-minded. And my grandmother.
Your grandmother.
Yeah, Cafe Europa tonight is her 80th birthday.
And you want me to come?
Look, my grandmother's a retired English teacher. I need someone at dinner who can respond to her obscure literary references.
So that would be my job.
Yeah, otherwise she'll ask me, and I won't have a clue, and I'll look like the prize idiot.
Bertha enters, nearing the end of a conversation on her cell phone.
That's right, Lucille Hughes.
So, Abby, what do you say?
Hughes, Hughes.
Well, it's a very tempting offer.
That's right.
No,
I'll wait for their call.
I've got a lot of pondering to do.
I totally get that. I just thought,
Okay, sure.
maybe another time.
Bye.
Matthew waves and exits.
What did Matthew want?
I'm a moron.
I thought you were a dork.
I'm a moron.
When did this metamorphosis take place?
When Matthew asked me to dinner,
You're going out to dinner? Oh, now that'd be a first.
Cafe Europa.
Wow. You should probably change. I hear they have a no clowns dress code.
With his grandmother.
Matthew must think you're special.
No, he just wants me there for literature backup.
literature backup.
Doesn't matter. I turned him down.
You did what?
I said no.
Because of Mrs. Hughes?
No, not because of Mrs. Hughes.
Mrs. Hughes would want you to go.
Mrs. Hughes would want me to do a whole lot more than just have dinner.
Then why?
Because I'm a moron.
While Bertha crosses to Abby, looks her in the eyes, and arranges a few loose strands of Abby's hair.
You know, one day, dear girl, someone very clever is going to figure out a way around that cast iron shell you've built to keep everyone out.
No sweat, Bertha. Nice guys are lining the block to spend quality time with me and Charlie.
Abby,
Or maybe take the special guided tour of my mom's preferred places to score smack.
Abby, you are not your parents.
Bertha's cell phone rings. She looks at her phone.
It's a funeral home. Hello? Yeah, I called about Lucille Hughes. Uh-huh.
Bertha exits. Pause. Abby crosses to Mrs. Hughes. Suddenly, the lights go out. In the dark, Charlie enters.
Crap, they shut off the power. Bertha!
Pause. No answer. Louder.
Bertha!
Pause. Abby listens. Abby is frightened.
Charlie?
Abby finds the flashlight and sweeps the beam around the store. The beam comes to rest on Charlie's face.
Hello, Abigail.
What are you doing here, Charlie?
I turned off the lights.
Turn on the lights, Charlie.
No, the Russians are watching.
All right, Charlie, listen to me. Don't move. I'm gonna go turn on the lights. It'll be okay.
Abby crosses and mimes turning the lights back on. Lights up. Charlie is standing there with a large box.
I brought you a box.
I can see that.
The box will keep you safe.
I'm going to be okay, Charlie.
No. People will try to hurt you. They hurt little girls. Little girls.
I'm strong enough to defend myself now.
When Bertha enters talking on the phone, Charlie is frightened and rushes out of the store.
We're a little hard to find, so I'll stand outside. Okay, good. Bye.
Bertha sees the box and crosses to it. Abby follows.
This is new.
Charlie brought me a box.
Why?
When you're living on the street, a box protects you from the rain, from creeps trying to molest you while you sleep, from...
I know, but you're not going to be living on the street.
Charlie can't grasp that. So he's trying to protect me from danger the best way he knows how.
With a box.
The box.
Bertha puts her arm around Abby as they look at the box. Bertha and Abby recognize the effort Charlie is making, however delusional, to keep Abby safe.
It's a good box.
Yeah. It's a very good box.
Almost as an afterthought, Bertha hands Abby a check.
What's this?
Lunch money.
Lunch money? This is a decade of lunch.
If you eat ramen noodles.
What else would I eat?
Well then, now you have food and lodging.
All that's left is for me to go out and write a New York Times bestseller.
And you will. Abby, Mrs. Hughes and I have loved you with everything we have.
I know. And I will always be grateful, Bertha, my whole life. Believe me, you and Mrs. Hughes saved me from this godforsaken neighborhood.
No, Abby. The truth is, we all saved each other.
Bertha gives Abby a long, loving hug, a goodbye of sorts.
Well, I better go outside to flag down the funeral home, guys.
Bertha exits. Abby sits on the floor beside Mrs. Hughes. She recognizes Matthew's book under the chair, pulls it out, and holds it up.
Mrs. Hughes, Would you like me to read to you while you wait?
Abby reaches up, takes Mrs. Hughes' hand, opens the book, and starts to read as the lights and sound fade.
Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Chapter 1. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. However little known the feeling or views of such a man may be on his first entering a neighborhood, this truth is so well fixed in the minds of the surrounding families that he is considered as the rightful property of someone or other of their daughters.
Curtain.